Hello, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. Today, the book I'll be interpreting for you is How Fear Works, which explores the workings of fear. Fear is a common emotion and psychological phenomenon, but there has never been a time in history quite like today, where so many people experience fear so frequently. In this society where risks are ever present, we find ourselves worrying and fearing more and more about things, from global warming and environmental pollution to events like the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, as well as seemingly minor concerns like the sugar content in bubble tea, formaldehyde in furniture, or carcinogens in cosmetics. It seems that there are increasingly more factors making us feel unsafe in our surroundings. This book, Fear, will enlighten us on why fear has permeated today's society and how we should deal with this culture of fear. The author of this book is the British sociologist Frank Furedi, a distinguished professor of sociology at the University of Kent in the UK. He has previously written works such as Culture of Fear, Politics of Fear, and Where Have All the Intellectuals Gone? London Review of Books has praised him as undoubtedly one of the foremost intellectuals in the UK, Europe, and the world, and Sydney Morning Herald hails him as the most interesting thinker in the humanities. It's worth noting that the content in Furedi's book primarily pertains to the Western world, but the issues he describes also exist to varying degrees in regions and countries outside the West. So, what does this book say? In the following discussion, I'll interpret it from three aspects. First, the characteristics of contemporary fear culture. Second, who is contributing to the propagation of fear culture. Third, the detrimental effects of fear culture and how we should address it. Alright, let's start with the first part. Let's take a look at the evolution of the emotion of fear in history and the main characteristics of contemporary fear culture. Fear is, first and foremost, a physiological instinct. When humans or animals feel their lives are threatened, they experience fear. However, unlike animals, humans have an inherited fear stemming from culture. For example, while animals may experience fear when facing natural predators, humans can feel the fear of death in their daily lives. The fear of death is the most primal fear in human society, serving as the prototype for all other fears. This is why, during the early stages of human civilization, ancient sages began to contemplate the fear of death and attempt to alleviate human anxiety about it. In ancient China, Confucius and Zhuangzi pondered concepts like the unknown of birth and the known of death, and living and dying. In ancient India, Gautama Buddha introduced the concept of nirvana, asserting that only by transcending the cycle of life and death could one escape the various troubles and suffering in life. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Epicurus claimed that once people correctly understood death, they would no longer fear it. He had a famous saying, "Death is nothing to us because when we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we no longer exist." This means that we and death cannot coexist, so we have no reason to worry about it because it has no relevance to us. If Epicurus used profound philosophical reasoning to combat the fear of death, another ancient Greek philosopher, Plato, offered a more practical solution. In The Republic, Plato wrote that to make the city's soldiers unafraid of death and brave on the battlefield, values such as courage and a lack of fear of sacrifice should be strongly promoted among them. It should be ensured that they fear failure more than death in battle. In addition, the city should implement policies to weaken soldiers' attachments to family, friends, and wealth. For instance, fallen soldiers should be granted an immortal hero status. Plato's student, Aristotle, also believed that the virtue of courage could eliminate the fear of death. If a person believes that their actions are noble, they will possess great courage and will not fear death, even though it may come. Following the fear of death, another ancient fear in human society is religious fear. The earliest gods were embodiments of fear, as ancient people believed that rare natural phenomena like thunder, lightning, and hurricanes were caused by the gods. Eclipses and comets were seen as warnings from the gods, while earthquakes and volcanic eruptions symbolized divine anger. This fear of the gods was not only a core feature of primitive religions but also permeated monotheistic religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In monotheistic religions, the Old Testament instructs people on what to fear and what not to fear, praising believers for their fear and awe of God. The prophet Moses repeatedly encouraged the Jewish people to forsake their fear of enemies in favor of their fear of God. Moses said, "You shall fear the Lord your God." The scriptures continually emphasize the fear of God. For example, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. This religious fear gave rise to a new fear, the fear of hell, where sinners would be cast down. This threat made devout Christians fear greatly. In modern Western society, as religious influence waned, the power of both fear of God and fear of hell decreased. Just a century ago, people believed that science and reason could deal a lethal blow to fear. The British philosopher Russell once said, "Science can help us conquer the fears that have plagued generations." However, scientific progress has not made people today less fearful, but has, in fact, brought about more fears. In the past, people were concerned about divine punishment, a relatively nebulous concept. Today, people worry about the negative effects of technology, and everything from major to minor matters has the potential to become dangerous. Firstly, technological advancements have plunged the world into rapid change, leaving people feeling lost in the midst of these changes. Uncertainty is a significant source of fear. Secondly, while technology has brought convenience to our lives, it has also brought new problems. For instance, the invention of plastic and greenhouse gas emissions has exacerbated environmental pollution, and people seem perplexed about how to address these new problems. Thirdly, the more knowledge humans acquire, the larger the realm of the unknown becomes. What we know is like a circle, and the area outside that circle is the unknown territory. As the circle's area expands, so does its circumference, increasing contact with the unknown. This expanding realm of the unknown fuels people's fear of the future. According to the author Ferretti, the fear in human society today differs significantly from past fears. It exhibits three main characteristics. The first characteristic is the demoralization of fear. As mentioned earlier, people's primary fears in the past were the fear of death and religious fear, and the methods to address these fears were closely tied to morality. Faced with the fear of death, you needed to muster your inner courage or establish a value higher than life itself. These were moral matters. When dealing with religious fear, people needed to regulate their behavior morally by forsaking evil and embracing goodness to earn God's favor. However, today, the moral aspect of fear has been greatly weakened. This is directly related to the rise of psychology and psychoanalysis in the early 20th century. Psychologists and psychoanalysts began to view fear as a negative emotion or as a manifestation of underlying illness. For instance, in the 1920s, many psychoanalysts believed that fear was essentially a form of psychic weakness and a precursor to mental breakdown. By the 1930s, some psychologists explained the fear of hell as a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, and some even attributed it to unresolved weaning conflicts in infancy. Thus, fear became a medical issue, and the solution to fear shifted from moral considerations to medication. The second characteristic of today's fear culture is its ubiquitous nature. This means that whereas people's fears were mostly related to major life and death issues in the past, today's people can find potential risks in the minutiae of daily life, such as clothing, food, shelter, transportation, and child-rearing. Raising children has become a particularly anxiety-laden and fearful endeavor for modern parents. Today's parents are bombarded with parenting warnings from various sources, each describing their child's world as full of dangers. For example, the playground, which used to be a place for children to play, run, and have fun, has now become a perilous zone. Children on the playground might encounter chemical pollution, bloody accidents, school bullying, and dangerous strangers. Choosing a nanny has become a matter of great concern as well. The advice given to parents is vast and often conflicting. Some professionals say that parents should avoid letting children be exposed to direct sunlight to prevent skin cancer. However, other experts suggest that children should be exposed to sunlight regularly to avoid vitamin D deficiency or calcium deficiency, also known as rickets. Even seemingly harmless stuffed animals may hide enormous risks. Experts advise parents to choose fabric toys over synthetic leather or fur toys because children tend to chew on and suck items that should not be put in their mouths. Parents are warned against purchasing toys with small parts that could be swallowed, leading to choking. Plush toys should not be placed near sleeping infants, as they might roll over and suffocate themselves. The author laments that when buying even the most mundane items, risk assessments are necessary, and there are few things left in life that are truly safe and reliable. The third characteristic of today's fears is their personalization. In the past, fears were often collective, with people fearing gods or monarchs as a group. As individuals, people shared a common fear of deities or rulers. Today, however, people's fears are often unrelated to groups but centered on their personal lives. Various public opinion polls show that today's people are most concerned about issues like financial security, rising prices, career prospects, and child education, which are personal matters. People fear disability, cancer, sudden financial needs, and so on. Surprisingly, the highly sensationalized topic of global terrorism receives little concern from the public. This shows that the fears and anxieties of the 21st century are not about global disasters, societies, or nations but are concentrated on personal and familial concerns. Alright. After discussing the historical evolution of fear and the main characteristics of contemporary fear culture, let's move on to the second question. Who is fueling the fear culture, as the author suggests? The answer is media, politicians, and scientists. Yes, scientists are among those contributing to this culture. Surprising, isn't it? Let's go through them one by one. First, let's talk about the role of the media. It's quite evident that the media is a major force in disseminating fear-inducing information. Day in and day out, the media inundates us with reports that ecological crises are imminent, superviruses are lurking, people's mental health is spiraling out of control, and crime rates, despite brief declines, are rising again. In short, the world may not be getting any better. To capture people's attention, the media tends to use sensational and extreme rhetoric, such as extinction, risk, doom, tipping point, and so on. For example, in The Guardian, a renowned British newspaper, the term extinction appeared 93 times in 1988, increased to 207 times in 2007, and reached 602 times in 2016, nearly twice a day. Keep in mind that The Guardian is known for its calm and objective reporting. Another favorite term widely used in Western media is ticking time bomb, invoking a sense of impending catastrophe. The bomb is ticking, and once it explodes, there's no turning back. The author notes that even everyday news like weather forecasts is filled with terrifying rhetoric, describing common weather phenomena like storms, heavy snow, and high temperatures as extreme weather. Behind the use of such terminology is the media's increasing emphasis on the world's risks, as if everything is unpredictable and out of control. According to the author, the media doesn't create fear as much as it intentionally caters to people's anxieties and fears to boost circulation. Now, let's move on to the role of politicians. The author points out that fear appeals and fear performances have become tools and strategies that Western politicians use to manipulate public opinion and appeal to voters. Today's Western politicians seize every opportunity to perform fear and anxiety, striving to stir up a sense of insecurity among the electorate to win votes. Take the example of the Brexit debate in the UK. Both the Conservative and Labour parties engaged in lengthy battles not about whether staying in the EU or leaving was better but rather about which option would cause more significant harm to the UK. In other words, they didn't try to persuade each other positively but rather used a series of negative predictions to attack each other. This is a typical fear performance. Here's a classic example. In 2002, then U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, during a press conference, was asked why the U.S. military couldn't find the so-called weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Rumsfeld responded with a statement that's come to be known as the unknown unknowns. He said, "We know there are known knowns, there are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns, that is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know." The implication was that although the US hadn't found these weapons, it didn't prove they didn't exist, and the threat might be more severe than initially thought, as it belonged to the category of unknown unknowns. The author comments that Rumsfeld was a master of fear performance, using a light-hearted and almost defiant tone to deliver such a message. After that press conference, many Western politicians began using the term unknown unknowns to describe some elusive and frightening threat, even though these threats might not exist at all. To make their fear performances more effective, Western politicians sometimes praise the fears and anxieties in people's minds. They tell voters, "I know you're afraid. That's okay, it's normal. In fact, it's beneficial." For example, American political scientist George Marcus claimed that anxiety makes people better citizens because most Americans don't have a deep understanding of politics or candidates' positions on various issues. Yet, citizens filled with anxiety tend to be more informed because their emotions drive them to focus on issues in the face of great uncertainty. Let's take a look at a more recent example, former U.S. President Donald Trump, who was a master of fear performance. Whether during his campaign or his time in office, he vigorously emphasized the insecurity of the United States. He claimed that Mexican immigrants brought crime and drugs, immigrants were taking American jobs, and China was threatening the country's economic status. He addressed the theme of insecurity repeatedly, suggesting that only he, Donald Trump, could protect Americans. In 2016, when accepting the Republican presidential nomination, he stated, "I have a message for all of you, the crime and violence that today afflicts our nation will soon, and I mean very soon, come to an end." The underlying message was that only Trump could ensure the safety of Americans. That covers the media and politicians. Now, let's explore the role of scientists. The author points out that the fear culture has also infiltrated Western science. Scientists warn the public about the results of their research, which is not a problem in itself. The issue is that an increasing number of scientists use sensational language in their communication to raise alarms about global catastrophes and make them more appealing to the public. Even some respected scientists are not exceptions to this trend. For instance, there's a book titled The End: What Science and Religion Tell Us About the Apocalypse, by the astronomer Martin Rees. In this book, Rees tells readers that the probability of humanity surviving until 2100 is only 50%, suggesting that human extinction might be impending. Such predictions are not new, but in the past, they were often presented with a serious and ominous tone. However, in Rees' book, The End of the World, The Science and Ethics of Human Extinction, the language used is light-hearted, almost playful. Rees writes that he's wagered $1,000 that by 2020, an event like a bioterror attack will claim 1 million lives. Next, consider the example of smallpox, a disease that was eradicated by humanity in the 20th century. Some scientists worry that due to climate change, the melting Siberian ice may expose the bodies of those who died from smallpox before the 20th century, potentially leading to a resurgence of the disease. A medical researcher named Pascal Bruckner despairingly commented that humans hadn't conquered a single disease, and new diseases were branching out. This made human efforts appear futile and absurd. Even some seemingly innocent activities can be condemned by scientists as damaging to the environment and nature. For example, the act of grilling food, commonly enjoyed in the warmer weather, was criticized. In 2006, Professor Paul Hunter of the University of East Anglia in the UK wrote that as the weather warmed, more Britons were grilling outdoors. However, this behavior was seen as dangerous. First, it was considered less hygienic as a method of food preparation, increasing the risk of infection by bacteria like Salmonella. Second, rising outdoor temperatures could trigger malaria outbreaks. Lastly, the charcoal used in grilling produced substantial carbon emissions, not to mention the potential cancer risks associated with consuming grilled meat. So, why do scientists use such sensational language? According to climate scientist Stephen Schneider, it's because they need to stimulate the public's imagination. They have to provide terrifying scenarios and use simplified, dramatic language, all while downplaying their own doubts. Schneider's colleague, David Victor, shares this view, praising the Hollywood film, The Day After Tomorrow, as an example. The movie depicts the consequences of climate change, with tornadoes, tsunamis, earthquakes wreaking havoc globally. It's a typical Hollywood disaster film. Victor says that despite the film's many inaccuracies, it can raise awareness of climate change, and that's a good thing. In summary, many scientists today believe that powerful and even alarmist fear appeals are more persuasive than moderate and weak appeals. The result is that media, politicians, and scientists converge to inundate human society with overwhelming and sensational rhetoric, pushing the entire society deeper into fear culture. Alright. In the final part, let's understand what harm this culture of fear can bring today and how we should deal with it. First, let's talk about the harm. The author believes that today's culture of fear weakens the power of morality. In the past, people relied on virtues to confront fear, but now we have unconsciously distanced ourselves from these virtues. Take courage, for example, as we discussed earlier. Aristotle believed that courage could help people overcome the fear of death. If a person believes that their actions are noble, they will have unparalleled courage and will be willing to stand up for the benefit of others. However, people today are only willing to assess various risks without showing the courage to do the right thing. This risk-averse attitude has even affected the behavior of police and military personnel. In May 2007, in Manchester, UK, a 10-year-old boy jumped into a pond, and his sister drowned while trying to rescue him. At the time, 2 serving police officers stood by the pond but did not jump in to help. They watched the tragedy unfold without taking action. Afterward, these 2 officers defended themselves, saying they lacked water rescue training, a reason supported by the police. The author comments in the book that when faced with a child drowning, the police chose to stand by, illustrating the absurdity of today's inclination to avoid risks. If even the police are unwilling to take responsibility for helping others, then the general public will become even more hesitant and panicked in the face of danger. Of course, today's movies and literature still advocate courage and heroism. However, in everyday life, we have become increasingly distant from these virtues. Traditional morality emphasizes responsibility and altruism, but today many so-called virtues are merely tools people adopt to achieve their own happiness. For example, there's a book titled The Pocketbook of Mindfulness, in which a chapter on cultivating courage offers the following advice: try new things. Learning new things takes courage, such as joining a fitness class even if you don't know how to do the exercises, going to a restaurant you've never been to before. Going to a new restaurant can be an exercise in courage. If Aristotle were to hear this advice, he would probably find it absurd. Another obvious harm of the culture of fear is its impact on the growth and maturity of young people. Today's children are described as superfragile individuals who need complete protection. Any form of pressure, criticism, or tension can harm their well-being. In this situation, parents and educators are afraid to apply pressure to children. In Australia, teachers are advised not to use red pens to grade students' assignments but to use less aggressive colors like blue or green. This is said to improve students' mood when receiving their assignments. In the UK, many teachers no longer write comments on students' incorrect answers because they are afraid that those comments might make the children feel pressured and emotionally hurt. However, a child can only learn and grow by experiencing pressure and challenges. Excessive protection of children today restricts their ability to develop independence and adventurous spirit, significantly prolonging the time young people rely on adults. Some young adults, even in their 20s, are still mentally children. They are unwilling to take on public responsibilities and are even more reluctant to take risks. The most extreme consequence of the culture of fear is that people become pessimistic about the future. This may be the most severe consequence of the culture of fear. This consequence has already begun to take shape in today's society. Contemporary society is filled with a pessimistic outlook on the future. People believe that bad things are bound to happen, it's just a matter of when and how quickly they will occur. The issue is not whether they will happen but when they will happen. This pessimistic outlook has even evolved into an emotion that blames humanity itself for all wrongs. People now see humans as the problem, destined to drag the world into the abyss of destruction. Humans are not problem solvers but the root of the problem. This fear even extends to newborns. Throughout history, every civilization considered the birth of a child to be a great joy. However, today, people are beginning to fear having children, believing that humanity needs to strictly control the number of newborns. An Australian doctor named Barry Walters wrote an article expressing the view that every new life coming into the world leads to increased greenhouse gas emissions. Thus, he argued that we should not provide financial subsidies to the mothers of newborns. Instead, we should collect a baby tax from the parents based on the environmental governance principle of who pollutes, pays, in the form of carbon emission taxes. The question of whether humanity can survive in the 21st century is already bad enough, and now it has escalated to the question of whether humanity should continue to exist in the 21st century. The fear of the future has shaken humanity's belief in itself. So, what should we do? The author believes that we should not simply accept it. Humans should not define themselves as fragile beings, allowing fear to dominate their minds. Besides just fear and anxiety, we actually have other choices. How to deal with fear is not the main content of this book, but the author still provides some solutions. For example, we should focus on cultivating the independence of children's thinking and behavior, giving them more opportunities to experiment and take risks, making them more self-confident, self-respecting, and more experienced in dealing with various risks and challenges. To deal with fear, the most important thing is to awaken people's fading moral consciousness. Among these, 2 virtues are most important. First is courage, as we've discussed several times before. A courageous person will still feel fear, but they will not be overwhelmed by this emotion. They will do the right thing out of noble purposes. Just like Winston Churchill said, courage is the first of human qualities because it guarantees all the others. Another important moral quality is prudence. Prudence involves acknowledging the existence of risks and threats, reflecting on the nature of those risks, and making rational judgments. It involves taking the best actions and responses in the face of those risks and threats. Unlike risk avoidance, prudence maintains an open attitude toward risks and dares to take risks when appropriate. As Madame Curie said, there is nothing to fear but fear itself. Now, to reduce our fear, it's time to learn more about some things. Alright, Fear, by Tim Booker has been interpreted up to this point. Congratulations on completing another book, and thank you all for your support and attention. Please subscribe to Tim Booker's channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, goodbye.